The afternoon sun blazed down on the military training facility as Sarah Martinez adjusted her combat uniform one last time. At 23, she had already proven herself as one of the most dedicated female recruits in her unit. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her boots shone despite the dusty training ground. Today marked her final week of advanced combat training before deployment. Sarah had joined the Navy 2 years ago with a clear mission. Growing up in a small Texas town, she watched her older brother struggle with PTSD after returning from overseas. She wanted to serve her country and help other soldiers avoid the mental battles her brother faced daily. Her determination showed in every drill, every exercise, and every challenge thrown her way. The training facility buzzed with activity. Recruits moved between different stations, practicing everything from hand-to-hand combat to weapons handling. Sarah's group had been assigned to knife combat training, something she had been looking forward to for weeks. She excelled in close-quarters combat and felt confident about the afternoon's session. Instructor Sergeant Davis gathered the group of 12 recruits around the equipment table. Training knives lay arranged in neat rows, their dulled edges designed for safe practice but still capable of teaching proper technique. The sergeant explained the day's objectives while Sarah listened intently, taking mental notes of every detail. "Today we focus on disarming techniques," Sergeant Davis announced. "You'll work in pairs, alternating between attacker and defender. Remember, these are training weapons, but treat them with the same respect you'd show a real blade." Sarah paired up with her usual training partner, Maria Gonzalez, another dedicated recruit who shared her commitment to excellence. They had pushed each other through countless exercises over the past months, building a friendship based on mutual respect and shared goals. Maria had Sarah's back, and Sarah had hers. As the training session began, other pairs of recruits spread across the mat area. The sound of controlled movements filled the air as soldiers practiced the techniques they had learned. Sarah and Maria took turns playing attacker and defender, each movement precise and calculated. But not everyone approached the training with the same level of professionalism. 3 male recruits from a different unit had been assigned to join their session. Jake Morrison, Brad Stevens, and Tony Walsh had reputations that preceded them. They treated military service more like a fraternity than a profession, often making inappropriate comments and pushing boundaries. Sarah had encountered their type before, men who joined the military thinking it would be like the movies, full of glory and brotherhood, but without understanding the discipline and respect required. She usually ignored their behavior and focused on her own training. But today felt different. Their comments seemed more pointed, their attitudes more aggressive. Jake Morrison, a tall blonde from California, had made several remarks about female soldiers throughout the week. He questioned whether women belonged in combat roles and often suggested they were taking spots from more qualified male candidates. His friends, Brad and Stevens, usually laughed along, feeding off each other's negative energy. During a brief water break, Sarah overheard Jake talking to his buddies near the equipment table. "I don't get why we have to train with them," he said, gesturing towards Sarah and Maria. "They're just going to slow us down when it matters." Maria shot Sarah a look, but Sarah simply shook her head. She had heard worse comments before and learned that responding usually made things worse. Better to let her performance speak for itself. She had consistently outscored most of the male recruits in their unit, and her instructors had nothing but praise for her dedication. The training resumed with more complex scenarios. Sergeant Davis introduced situations where recruits had to disarm an attacker while protecting a fellow soldier. This required teamwork, trust, and split-second decision-making. Sarah and Maria excelled at these exercises, moving together like they had been partners for years. Jake's group struggled with the teamwork aspect. They approached each scenario, trying to be individual heroes rather than working together. Their competitive attitudes toward each other interfered with their ability to function as a unit. Sergeant Davis had to repeatedly correct their form and remind them about the importance of cooperation. As the afternoon wore on, the exercises became more intense. Sweat soaked through everyone's uniforms as they pushed themselves through increasingly difficult scenarios. The Texas heat made everything more challenging, but Sarah thrived under pressure. This was exactly the kind of training that would prepare her for real-world situations. Near the end of the session, Sergeant Davis announced the final exercise. Each recruit would face a scenario where they had to disarm multiple attackers while protecting a wounded comrade. It was the most challenging drill of the day, requiring everything they had learned over the past weeks. Sarah volunteered to go first. She positioned herself in the center of the mat, while 3 recruits with training knives approached from different angles. Her job was to neutralize all 3 threats while keeping them away from Maria, who played the role of an injured soldier. The drill began, and Sarah moved with fluid precision. She disarmed the first attacker, redirected the second, and was moving toward the third when something went wrong. Jake Morrison, playing one of the attackers, broke from the established protocol. Instead of following the practiced movements, he grabbed Sarah's uniform shirt with his free hand. "Let's see how tough you really are," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Sarah tried to continue the exercise properly, but Jake's grip on her shirt threw off her balance. She stumbled slightly, and in that moment, Jake raised the training knife higher than regulation allowed. The afternoon sun glinted off the dulled blade as he brought it down in a slashing motion across her uniform shirt. The fabric parted with a sharp ripping sound that echoed across the training area. Sarah's shirt split open from shoulder to hem, exposing her regulation undershirt. The unexpected move left her momentarily stunned. Not from any physical harm, but from the complete violation of training protocol and professional conduct. A hush fell over the entire training area. Even recruits at other stations stopped their exercises to stare. Maria jumped up from her position, her face flushed with anger. Sergeant Davis took a step forward, his expression shifting from instruction mode to serious concern. Jake stood over Sarah with a smirk on his face, still holding the training knife. "Oops," he said with mock innocence. "Guess your uniform wasn't as tough as you thought." Brad and Tony laughed nervously, unsure whether their friend had crossed a line or just pulled off an impressive practical joke. The other recruits remained silent, sensing that something significant had just happened but not sure how to respond. Sarah slowly stood up, holding the torn edges of her shirt together. Her face burned with embarrassment and anger, but she maintained her composure. Years of dealing with bullies and doubters had taught her to control her emotions, especially in public situations. She would not give Jake the satisfaction of seeing her break down, but as she looked around the silent training area, Sarah realized this moment would define more than just her afternoon. How she responded would impact her reputation, her career, and her future in the military. More importantly, how the institution responded would determine whether female soldiers like her could truly count on protection and respect from their fellow service members. Unknown to everyone in the immediate training area, Staff Sergeant Michael "Hawk" Hawkins had been observing from the elevated observation deck. A decorated Navy SEAL with 3 combat deployments, Hawk was at the facility consulting on advanced training techniques. He had been quietly watching the exercise, noting areas for improvement in the curriculum. Hawk had seen the entire incident unfold. His trained eyes caught every detail, from Jake's initial inappropriate grip to the deliberate slashing motion that cut Sarah's uniform. As a SEAL, he understood the importance of discipline, respect, and protocol. What he had just witnessed violated everything the military stood for. The observation deck stood 20 feet above the training floor, giving Hawk a clear view of the entire facility. He had been taking notes on training effectiveness when Jake's actions caught his attention. Now he stood motionless, his jaw set in a hard line. Watching how the situation would develop, Sarah remained standing in the center of the mat, surrounded by silence. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious, and a few showing the same smirking attitude as Jake's. This was her moment of truth, and she knew it. The torn uniform shirt fluttered slightly in the afternoon breeze that swept through the open training facility. Sarah straightened her shoulders and looked directly at Jake Morrison. She would not be intimidated, and she would not back down, but she also knew that her response had to be measured and professional. "That was not regulation protocol," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the silent training area. Jake shrugged, still holding the training knife casually. "Accidents happen in combat training," he replied. "Maybe you should stick to desk jobs if you can't handle a little unexpected action." His comment drew snickers from his friends and a few other male recruits. Sarah felt her anger rising but kept her expression neutral. She had dealt with men like Jake before, but never in such a public setting with such clear disrespect for military protocol. Sergeant Davis finally found his voice. "Morrison, what the hell was that?" he demanded, striding across the mat toward the group. "Just following through on the exercise, Sergeant," Jake replied with practiced innocence. "She couldn't handle the pressure, so her gear failed. Maybe we need better equipment or better soldiers." The implication hung in the air like smoke from a fired weapon. Jake was suggesting that Sarah's inability to defend herself properly had caused the incident, shifting blame from his own actions to her supposed inadequacy. It was a classic bully tactic, designed to make the victim question their own worth while absolving the aggressor of responsibility. Sarah opened her mouth to respond. But before she could speak, a new voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. "Stand down, recruit." Every head in the training area turned toward the sound. Staff Sergeant Hawkins had descended from the observation deck and now stood at the edge of the training mat. His presence commanded immediate attention, even from those who didn't know his rank or credentials. Hawk stood 6 feet tall with the kind of build that came from years of elite military training. His uniform bore the distinctive insignia of a Navy SEAL, and his bearing left no doubt about his experience and authority. Scars on his hands and a slight limp from an old injury spoke to real combat experience. Not just training facility bravado. "I said, stand down," Hawk repeated, his voice carrying absolute authority. Jake Morrison's smirk faltered as he took in the approaching figure. Something about Hawk's demeanor suggested this was not a man to be trifled with. The training knife in Jake's hand suddenly felt heavy and inappropriate. "Put the weapon down and step back," Hawk commanded. Jake complied immediately, placing the training knife on the equipment table and moving away from Sarah. His friends Brad and Tony had already retreated several steps, sensing that the situation had escalated beyond their comfort level. Hawk's eyes swept the entire training area, taking in every detail. His gaze lingered on Sarah's torn uniform, Jake's defensive posture, and the mix of expressions among the watching recruits. Years of combat experience had taught him to assess situations quickly and accurately. "Sergeant Davis," Hawk said without taking his eyes off Jake, "I want a full report of what happened here, and I want it now." The authority in his voice brooked no argument. This was no longer a training exercise or a minor disciplinary issue. A Navy SEAL had taken control of the situation, and everyone present understood that the consequences would be severe and immediate. Sergeant Davis straightened to attention as he faced Staff Sergeant Hawkins. The training facility remained eerily quiet, with only the distant sounds of other exercises continuing in far corners of the base. Every recruit in the immediate area stood motionless, understanding that they were witnessing something significant. "Staff Sergeant, we were conducting knife disarmament training when Recruit Morrison deviated from protocol," Davis reported. He grabbed Recruit Martinez's uniform and used the training blade to cut her shirt during what should have been a controlled exercise. Hawk listened without interruption, his experienced eyes continuing to assess the scene. He had witnessed enough combat situations to recognize when someone was making excuses versus telling the truth. Davis's account matched what he had observed from the deck. "Recruit Morrison," Hawk said, turning his full attention to Jake, "explain your actions." Jake shifted uncomfortably under the SEAL's intense gaze. The confidence he had displayed moments earlier evaporated in the face of real military authority. "Staff Sergeant, I was just following the exercise parameters. Sometimes in real combat, uniforms get damaged. This is a training facility, not a combat zone," Hawk replied coldly. "Training protocols exist for a reason. You deliberately grabbed another soldier's uniform and used a weapon to damage military property and compromise her safety." "It was just a training knife," Jake protested weakly. "A weapon is a weapon," Hawk stated. "Intent matters more than the tool used. Your intent was to humiliate and intimidate a fellow service member, not to complete the training objective." Sarah watched the exchange with growing amazement. For months, she had endured subtle and not-so-subtle harassment from male soldiers who questioned her belonging in the military. She had learned to fight her own battles and expected little help from the chain of command. Now, a decorated SEAL was holding Jake accountable in front of everyone. Hawk turned to address the gathered recruits. Everyone here just witnessed a fundamental violation of military conduct. This is not about gender, politics, or personal opinions. This is about discipline, respect, and the trust that must exist between soldiers. His voice carried across the training area with the authority of someone who had led men in life or death situations. In combat, you depend on the person next to you. If you cannot trust them to follow protocol in training, how can you trust them when bullets are flying? Jake's friends, Brad and Tony, exchanged nervous glances. They had encouraged Jake's behavior through their laughter and participation, but now realized they might face consequences as well. The casual atmosphere of harassment they had cultivated was crumbling under professional scrutiny. Recruit Morrison, you will report to the base commander immediately after this session. Hawk continued. Your actions constitute assault, destruction of military property, and conduct unbecoming. Sergeant Davis, please ensure he understands the full scope of potential charges. Jake's face went pale. What had started as a prank to embarrass Sarah was rapidly becoming a career-ending incident. Military justice moved swiftly and severely when soldiers violated the trust placed in them. Staff Sergeant, Jake began, his voice much smaller than before. I didn't mean. What you meant is irrelevant, Hawk cut him off. What matters is what you did and the example you set for other soldiers. You used a weapon to intimidate and humiliate a fellow service member. In any context, that is unacceptable. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and vindication. For the first time since joining the military, someone in authority was taking her side without question or hesitation. She had grown accustomed to fighting her battles alone, but Hawk's intervention showed her that not all leaders tolerated the behavior she had endured. Hawk then addressed Sarah directly. Recruit Martinez, are you injured? No, Staff Sergeant, Sarah replied, maintaining her military bearing despite the torn uniform. Do you require medical attention or counseling services? No, Staff Sergeant, Hawk nodded approvingly. Despite the incident, Sarah maintained her composure and professionalism. He had observed her performance during the training exercises and noted her skill level. She was exactly the kind of soldier the military needed more of, not fewer. Sergeant Davis, please escort Recruit Martinez to supply to obtain a replacement uniform, Hawk ordered. Then return here for a complete debrief of this incident. As Sarah prepared to leave with Sergeant Davis, Hawk called out once more. Recruit Martinez. Yes, Staff Sergeant. Your performance during today's exercises was exemplary. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. The simple statement meant more to Sarah than any formal commendation could have. Coming from a decorated Navy SEAL, it validated everything she had worked for over the past 2 years. She had proven herself capable and worthy of respect. After Sarah and Davis left, Hawk turned his attention to the remaining recruits. Jake stood isolated, his earlier bravado completely gone. Brad and Tony kept their distance, hoping to avoid being drawn into their friend's downfall. The rest of you, gather around, Hawk commanded. The recruits formed a loose circle around the SEAL, unsure what to expect. Some had laughed at Jake's actions. Others had remained silent. But all had witnessed the incident without intervening. What happened here today will define how you remember your military service, Hawk began. Not because of the incident itself, but because of how you respond to it going forward. He paused, making eye contact with several of the recruits. Some of you found Morrison's actions amusing. Others knew it was wrong, but said nothing. Both responses are failures of military bearing and personal character. The words hit hard because they were true. Several recruits who had snickered at Jake's joke now felt ashamed of their reactions. Others who had wanted to speak up regretted their silence. In the military, we are all part of one team, Hawk continued. When you allow harassment, discrimination, or assault to occur without intervention, you become complicit in those actions. You make the entire unit weaker and less effective. Jake remained silent during the lecture, understanding that anything he said would only make his situation worse. His military career was likely over. Ended, by a moment of poor judgment and toxic masculinity. Recruit Morrison will face formal charges and likely discharge, Hawk announced. His actions today demonstrated that he lacks the judgment and character required for military service. The question for the rest of you is whether you learned something from this incident or whether you'll repeat similar mistakes. Brad raised his hand tentatively. Staff Sergeant, what should we have done? You should have intervened immediately when you saw inappropriate conduct, Hawk replied. Military protocol exists to protect everyone, not just the people in charge. When someone violates that protocol, especially in a way that targets another soldier, it becomes everyone's responsibility to speak up. The lecture continued for another 10 minutes, with Hawk explaining the importance of unit cohesion, professional conduct, and mutual respect. He had given similar talks to SEAL teams before dangerous missions, emphasizing that personal conflicts and unprofessional behavior could get people killed. When Sarah returned with her replacement uniform, the training area had been cleared, except for Hawk and Sergeant Davis. Jake had been escorted to the base commander's office, while his friends faced their own disciplinary review. How are you feeling, Martinez? Hawk asked, as she approached. Better now, Staff Sergeant. Thank you for your intervention. I didn't intervene for you specifically, Hawk clarified. I intervened because Morrison's actions violated everything the military stands for. Your gender was irrelevant to my decision, Sarah nodded, understanding the distinction. Hawk had acted not out of chivalry or special consideration for women, but out of commitment to military standards and professional conduct. I watched your performance during the exercises, Hawk continued. Your technique is solid, and your tactical awareness is above average. Have you considered special operations training? The question caught Sarah off guard. Special operations had always seemed like an impossible dream, reserved for elite male soldiers with years of experience. The fact that a Navy SEAL was suggesting she might qualify changed her entire perspective on her career possibilities. I hadn't considered it, Staff Sergeant. I didn't think women were eligible for most special operations positions. Policies have changed, Hawk explained. Combat roles are now open to women who meet the standards. The question is whether you're willing to push yourself beyond what you think is possible. Sarah felt a surge of excitement mixed with apprehension. Special operations training was notoriously difficult, with failure rates above 90%, but the opportunity to prove herself at the highest levels of military service was exactly what she had dreamed of when she enlisted. I would be honored to try, Staff Sergeant. It's not about honor, Martinez. It's about capability and determination. Special operations teams need soldiers who can perform under extreme pressure and never compromise the mission or their teammates. Hawk handed her a card with contact information. If you're serious about this path, contact Master Chief Thompson at the Special Warfare Training Center. Tell him I recommended you for evaluation. The card felt heavy in Sarah's hand, representing possibilities she had never imagined. A few hours earlier, she had been dealing with harassment and wondering if she belonged in the military. Now, a Navy SEAL was recommending her for elite training. There's one more thing, Martinez, Hawk said as he prepared to leave. What happened today with Morrison will probably happen again, in different forms and different situations. The military is changing, but change takes time. You need to decide whether you're going to let incidents like this derail your goals or use them as motivation to prove your worth. I won't let anyone stop me from serving my country, Staff Sergeant. Good. Remember that determination when the training gets difficult. As Hawk walked away, Sarah looked down at the card in her hand. Master Chief Thompson, Special Warfare Training Center. The address was in Coronado, California, home to Navy SEAL training. Just holding the card made her feel like she was already part of something larger than herself. Sergeant Davis approached as she stood there, still processing everything that had happened. Martinez, you need to know that this incident will be part of your permanent record. Morrison's actions and the subsequent investigation will be documented. Will that hurt my chances for advancement? Sarah asked, concerned that being a victim might somehow damage her career. Actually, it might help, Davis replied. Staff Sergeant Hawkins has considerable influence, and his recommendation carries significant weight. The way you handled yourself today, maintaining professionalism despite the situation, reflects well on your character. That evening, Sarah sat in her barracks room, writing in her journal about the day's events. The torn uniform lay in her laundry bag, a reminder of Jake Morrison's attempt to humiliate her. But the business card sat on her desk, representing new opportunities and challenges. Her roommate Maria knocked and entered, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I heard about what happened after they took you to supply. Morrison is being processed for discharge. Hawk thinks I might be qualified for special operations training," Sarah said, showing her friend the card. Maria's eyes widened. "Special ops? Sarah, that's incredible. When will you contact them?" "Tomorrow. I need to think about whether I'm really ready for that level of training." "You've been ready since the day you enlisted," Maria said firmly. "Don't let Morrison's stupidity make you doubt yourself. If a Navy SEAL thinks you have what it takes, then you probably do." Sarah nodded, but her mind was already racing ahead to the challenges she would face. Special operations training would test every aspect of her physical and mental capabilities. She would be competing against the best soldiers from across all military branches, most of whom would have more experience than her. But Jake Morrison's attack had taught her something important about herself. When faced with humiliation and hostility, she hadn't broken down or given up. Instead, she had maintained her dignity and professionalism, earning the respect of a decorated SEAL in the process. If she could handle that pressure, maybe she could handle whatever special operations training threw at her. The card on her desk represented more than just an opportunity. It represented a chance to prove that female soldiers belonged at every level of military service. As she prepared for bed, Sarah thought about her brother back home in Texas. His PTSD struggles had motivated her to join the military, hoping to help other soldiers avoid similar mental battles. Special operations training would give her skills and credibility that could make a real difference in supporting fellow service members. The torn uniform in her laundry bag no longer felt like a symbol of humiliation. Instead, it reminded her of the moment when everything changed, when a Navy SEAL saw her potential and opened doors she hadn't known existed. Jake Morrison had tried to tear her down, but instead, he had inadvertently launched her toward heights she had never imagined possible. Tomorrow, she would make the phone call that could change her entire military career. Tonight, she would rest and prepare for whatever challenges lay ahead. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the communications office as Sarah dialed the number on Staff Sergeant Hawkins' card. Her hands trembled slightly as she waited for someone to answer, knowing this call could reshape her entire military career. Special Warfare Training Center, Master Chief Thompson speaking. "Master Chief, this is Petty Officer 3rd Class Sarah Martinez. Staff Sergeant Hawkins suggested I contact you regarding special operations evaluation." There was a brief pause before Thompson responded. "Hawkins mentioned he met a promising candidate yesterday. Are you the sailor who handled that incident at the training facility?" Word traveled fast in the military, especially when it involved Navy SEALs and formal disciplinary actions. Sarah wasn't surprised that Thompson had already heard about Jake Morrison's attack and subsequent discharge. "Yes, Master Chief. Staff Sergeant Hawkins observed my performance during combat training and suggested I might be qualified for advanced programs." "Hawkins doesn't make recommendations lightly," Thompson replied. "His word carries considerable weight in this community. Can you be at Coronado next Monday for initial evaluation?" End quote. On ring Grufid. Monday. On round by. End quote. End quote. Sarah's heart raced. Monday was only 5 days away. Barely enough time to arrange travel and prepare mentally for what lay ahead. But opportunities like this didn't come twice, and she couldn't afford to show any hesitation. "Yes, Master Chief. I'll be there." "Good. Report to Building 164 at 0600 hours. Bring your service record, medical clearance, and be prepared for 3 days of physical and psychological evaluation. This isn't summer camp, Martinez. We'll push you harder than anything you've experienced." After hanging up, Sarah sat in stunned silence. In less than a week, she would be at the Navy SEAL training facility. competing for a spot in one of the most elite military programs in the world. The incident with Jake Morrison had led to this moment, transforming what could have been a career setback into the opportunity of a lifetime. Over the following days, Sarah threw herself into preparation. She increased her physical training regimen, studying special operations requirements and mental toughness techniques. Her fellow sailors watched with a mixture of admiration and disbelief as word spread about her upcoming evaluation. Maria helped her prepare by running additional training scenarios and quizzing her on military protocols. "Remember," Maria said during one of their evening study sessions, "they're not just testing your physical abilities. They want to see how you handle pressure, work in teams, and adapt to unexpected challenges." Sarah nodded, remembering how she had maintained her composure during Jake's attack. That moment had demonstrated her ability to stay professional under stress, exactly the kind of mental toughness special operations teams required. The weekend before her departure, Sarah received unexpected visitors. Staff Sergeant Hawkins and Master Chief Thompson arrived at her base for what they described as a preliminary assessment. In reality, they wanted to observe her in her normal environment before the formal evaluation began. "Martinez, walk with us," Hawkins said as he and Thompson toured the training facilities. Sarah fell into step beside the two senior enlisted men, feeling simultaneously honored and nervous to be in their company. Other sailors stopped their activities to watch the trio pass, recognizing the significance of Navy SEALs visiting their base. "Tell us why you joined the military," Thompson said without preamble. Sarah had practiced this answer, but decided honesty would serve her better than rehearsed responses. "My brother came back from deployment with severe PTSD. Watching him struggle made me realize how much support service members need, both during and after their time in combat. I wanted to serve my country and help other soldiers avoid the mental battles he faced." Thompson and Hawkins exchanged glances. Personal motivation mattered in special operations, where soldiers faced extreme physical and psychological challenges. Sarah's desire to help others suggested the kind of character they looked for in elite units. "What do you think special operations training will teach you?" Hawkins asked. "How to perform at the highest levels under extreme pressure," Sarah replied. "How to be part of a team where failure isn't an option and every member depends on the others for survival." "And what makes you think you can handle that level of responsibility?" Thompson pressed. Sarah thought about Jake Morrison's attack and how she had responded. "Because I've already been tested under pressure and didn't break. When that recruit attacked me, I could have responded with anger or given up. Instead, I maintained my professionalism and trusted the system to handle the situation appropriately." "The system worked because Hawkins happened to be watching," Thompson pointed out. "What if he hadn't been there? What if your chain of command had covered up the incident or blamed you for Morrison's actions?" The question struck at Sarah's deepest fears about military service as a woman. She had heard stories of female soldiers whose complaints were dismissed or who faced retaliation for reporting harassment. The possibility that Jake's attack might have been swept under the rug had kept her awake several nights. "Then I would have continued serving and proving my worth through performance," Sarah said finally. "I can't control how others act, but I can control how I respond. My goal is to be so competent and professional that gender becomes irrelevant." Hawkins smiled slightly. "That's exactly the right attitude. In special operations, we care about one thing. Can you complete the mission? Everything else is noise." Their conversation was interrupted by commotion from the training area. A group of recruits had gathered around someone who appeared to be injured. Sarah instinctively moved toward the scene, her training as a combat medic kicking in before conscious thought. A young sailor had collapsed during a conditioning exercise, showing signs of heat exhaustion in the afternoon sun. Other recruits stood around uncertainly, unsure how to help. Sarah immediately took control of the situation. "Get him into the shade and elevate his legs," she ordered, dropping to her knees beside the unconscious sailor. "Someone call for medical assistance. I need water and ice if you have it." Thompson and Hawkins watched as Sarah efficiently managed the medical emergency. She checked the sailor's vital signs, monitored his breathing, and organized the other recruits to assist with cooling measures. Her commands were clear and confident, showing natural leadership under pressure. Within minutes, base medical personnel arrived and took over the sailor's care. The young man had regained consciousness and would make a full recovery thanks to Sarah's quick intervention. As the medics transported him to the infirmary, Thompson approached Sarah. "Good work, Martinez. How did you know what to do?" "I'm a certified combat medic, Master Chief. Medical training is part of my specialty." "That wasn't just medical knowledge," Hawkins observed. "You took command of a chaotic situation and got everyone working together effectively. That's leadership." The incident reinforced their assessment of Sarah's capabilities. Special operations required soldiers who could adapt quickly, take charge when necessary, and remain calm under pressure. Sarah had demonstrated all three qualities in the span of a few minutes. Monday morning arrived with California sunshine streaming through the windows of Building 164 at Naval Amphibious Base Coronado. Sarah stood outside the Special Warfare Training Center, looking at the facility where Navy SEALs had trained for decades. The building's modest exterior concealed some of the most challenging military training in the world. Inside, Sarah joined 11 other candidates from various military branches. 10 were men, all with impressive service records and obvious physical conditioning. She was the only woman in the group, a fact that drew subtle stares and whispered conversations. Master Chief Thompson addressed the group in a conference room lined with photos of SEAL teams and special operations missions. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your evaluation period. Over the next 3 days, we will test your physical capabilities, mental toughness, leadership potential, and ability to function as part of a team." He paused, making eye contact with each candidate. "Some of you will succeed. Most will not. The standards are non-negotiable, regardless of your gender, background, or previous achievements. We need operators who can perform at the highest levels when lives depend on their actions." The first day focused on physical assessments. Sarah had prepared extensively, but the SEAL instructors pushed every candidate beyond their comfort zones. Swimming tests in cold Pacific water, obstacle courses designed to simulate combat conditions, and endurance challenges that lasted for hours. By evening, 3 candidates had voluntarily withdrawn from the evaluation. The physical demands exceeded what they had experienced in their regular units, and they recognized they weren't ready for this level of training. Sarah remained, exhausted but determined to continue. The second day brought psychological evaluations and stress tests. Candidates faced scenarios designed to break down their mental defenses and reveal their true character under extreme pressure. Sarah drew on her experience with Jake Morrison's attack, remembering how she had maintained her composure when everything seemed to be falling apart. During one particularly challenging exercise, candidates had to navigate a complex problem, while instructors screamed contradictory orders and created deliberate chaos. Several candidates broke down under the pressure, unable to think clearly or maintain their focus. Sarah blocked out the noise and concentrated on the task, using techniques she had learned for dealing with harassment and hostile environments. "Martinez," one instructor called out during the chaos, "your teammate just got shot. What's your response?" Without hesitation, Sarah moved to the indicated candidate and began treating his simulated wounds, while continuing to work on the primary objective. "Securing the casualty while maintaining mission focus," she reported calmly. The instructor nodded approvingly and moved on to test other candidates. Sarah's ability to multitask under extreme stress impressed the evaluation team, who made notes about her performance for later review. That evening, only 7 candidates remained. The others had either withdrawn voluntarily or been released after failing to meet the standards. Sarah felt proud to have made it this far, but knew the final day would bring the most challenging tests. The third day focused on leadership and teamwork. Candidates rotated through different scenarios where each person had to lead the group through complex problems with incomplete information and conflicting priorities. Sarah had studied leadership principles extensively, but putting them into practice under pressure was entirely different. When her turn to lead arrived, Sarah faced a scenario involving a hostage rescue with multiple civilian casualties and limited resources. The other candidates played various roles, some cooperative and others deliberately difficult. She had to make quick decisions while managing personalities and maintaining team cohesion. Drawing on her experience as a combat medic, Sarah prioritized the mission objectives while ensuring team safety. She delegated tasks based on each person's strengths, maintained communication under pressure, and adapted her plan when new complications arose. Her natural inclination to help others translated well into military leadership. "Time," the instructor called, ending the exercise. Sarah looked around at her team members, realizing they had successfully completed the mission objectives while keeping everyone safe. The feeling of collective accomplishment was unlike anything she had experienced in her regular military duties. After the final evaluation, candidates waited in the conference room while the instructor team deliberated. Sarah sat quietly, replaying the past 3 days in her mind. She had given everything she had and performed to the best of her abilities. Whether that was enough remained to be seen. Master Chief Thompson returned with the results. Candidates Martinez, Johnson, Peterson, and Williams have met the standards for special operations training. Congratulations. Sarah felt a surge of joy mixed with disbelief. She had made it. Out of 12 candidates, only 4 had qualified. And she was one of them. The months of preparation, the incident with Jake Morrison, and the recommendation from Staff Sergeant Hawkins had all led to this moment. Those of you who qualified will report to basic underwater demolition, SEAL training in 6 weeks, Thompson continued. This evaluation was just the beginning. Bud S. will test everything you think you know about yourself and then push you further. As the candidates prepared to leave, Thompson pulled Sarah aside. Martinez, you performed well over the past 3 days. But I want you to understand what you're getting into. Bud S. has a failure rate over 80%. The instructors will push you harder than anything you've experienced, and being the only woman will add additional pressure. Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of what lay ahead. Master Chief, I'm ready for whatever challenges come next. I believe you are, Thompson replied. Your performance here suggests you have the mental toughness and leadership potential we need. Don't let anyone tell you that you don't belong there. The flight back to her home base gave Sarah time to process everything that had happened. A week earlier, she had been dealing with harassment from Jake Morrison. Now she was preparing for Navy SEAL training, one of the most elite military programs in the world. Maria waited at the airport, eager to hear about the evaluation results. When Sarah told her about qualifying for BUD-S, her friend let out a whoop of excitement that echoed through the terminal. I knew you could do it, Maria said as they drove back to base. So what happens next? 6 weeks to prepare for the most challenging training in the military, Sarah replied. And then we find out if I really have what it takes to be a Navy SEAL. That evening, Sarah called her brother in Texas to share the news. His struggle with PTSD had motivated her military service, and she wanted him to know that his pain had led to something positive. Sarah, that's incredible, he said, his voice filled with pride. I always knew you were stronger than the rest of us. Maybe if there had been soldiers like you when I was deployed, things would have been different. His words reminded Sarah why she had joined the military in the first place. The path from Jake Morrison's attack to Navy SEAL training seemed impossible, but it had happened because she refused to let harassment derail her goals. 6 weeks later, Sarah stood on the beach at Coronado, looking out at the Pacific Ocean where she would spend the next several months pushing her body and mind beyond their limits. The torn uniform from Jake's attack was long gone, but she kept Staff Sergeant Hawkins' business card as a reminder of how quickly everything could change. Bud-S training would test every aspect of her character and capabilities. Many would question whether a woman belonged in Navy SEAL training, just as Jake Morrison had questioned her place in the military. But Sarah had learned something important from that incident. She belonged wherever her skills and determination could take her. The sun was setting over the Pacific as Sarah prepared for the challenge of a lifetime. Jake Morrison's attempt to humiliate her had backfired spectacularly, launching her toward the elite ranks of military service instead of driving her away. Sometimes the worst attacks became the foundation for the greatest victories. As she walked toward the training facility, Sarah thought about all the young women who would follow in her footsteps. Her success or failure would impact their opportunities and the military's willingness to embrace gender integration at the highest levels. The responsibility felt heavy, but Sarah had learned to carry heavy loads. Tomorrow, she would begin the journey toward becoming a Navy SEAL, proving that dedication and character mattered more than gender or the expectations of bullies like Jake Morrison. The waves crashed against the shore as night fell over Coronado, and Sarah Martinez prepared to make history.